everyone, good morning. So I'm a second year in the School of Forestry in the ICON program, and I'm going to talk to you about the first summer of research I did, which was an exploratory assessment. So this idea of iconic species stems from the cultural and ecological connections that some plant and animal species have to distinct areas. In addition to those connections, they may also acquire an iconic status where they're symbolically associated with these distinct areas. And I'm loosely using an ecosystem services framing to understand and approach the idea of what an iconic species is and how it becomes that way. So ecosystem services framing proposes that the elements of ecosystems have these discrete measurable values that contribute to human well-being, such as enhancing water quality, like just as shrimp. And I am looking at this through the idea that symbolic status or iconic status could act as a distinct value of a species. And some ecosystem service assessments have started to approach this idea. So in the Millennium Ecosystem Assessment, they explicitly reference totemic species as an influence on multiple aspects of human experience. And the Ocean Health Index, which is a marine-specific ecosystem service assessment, mentions iconic species as a component of sense of place. And this is a relationship that I'm interested in for my overall dissertation research. However, the idea of iconic species in these ecosystem service assessments, or totemic species, the different versions of that, is not well operationalized and not well defined. And so there's different versions out there, and there's not really a solid way of measuring them. And specifically with this Ocean Health Index, they use WWF's designation of culturally significant species as their iconic species. So they didn't really actually do anything to understand that iconic element within their assessment. And to give you an idea more about sense of place, place is a framing that certain locations are inextricably linked to the embedded human experiences and perceptions and meanings there. And a sense of place is a person's cognitive and affective connections that they form with these locations. And some ways we can start to understand sense of place are through place attachment and attitude and place meaning, which is our interpretations of place. And my place is Jekyll Island. So this is a state park, but it also is an interesting situation because there's a residential community and a lot of tourist amenities there. And there's a conservation mandate on the island that keeps a large portion of it undeveloped and natural. And along that conservation vein, there's also the Georgia Sea Turtle Center, which is a rehab hospital for sea turtles of the southeast. And then there's a lot of nature-based recreation and ecotourism on the island. It's a large birding place. And then there's a historic context to the island as well. There's a preserved historic district that's also a large tourism draw. And it seems like Jekyll Island understands the impact of particular aspects of the landscape for the entire setting of the island and the entire feel of the island. So I pulled this quote from their website, and I want to point out from the moment you see our turtle crossing signs, you'll know you've arrived somewhere special. That is really significant to me, and I find that extremely interesting. They also go on to point out the importance of the canopy of live oaks as you enter, as that setting of the place that you're in. And then driftwood skeletons will forever be etched in your memory, so there's this lasting effect as well. And so I'm interested in piecing that apart and understanding what mechanisms are making this happen. So my research meta-question is, what is the role of an iconic species in the formation of a person's sense of place? And today I'm going to look further into this idea of iconic species. And I have a couple of objectives. I want to examine my participant definitions of iconic, and because there's not really a well-defined definition out there, especially when it's used in an ecosystem service assessment, I think this is important to start to understand what people think of when they hear this word. I want to identify the two most iconic species of Jekyll Island, and this will aid me as case studies in my future research. And then I want to assess the meanings and values that people attribute to these species. So here's some methods I'm going to use to tackle those. Methods I used. I've done this research. So I used semi-structured interviews this past summer with 33 people on Jekyll Island. These were two groups broadly long-term experiences on the island, which are residents and employees, and then short-term experiences, which are my visitors. And I did referral sampling for my long-term and intercept sampling at tourist destinations for the visitors. And this population was fairly homogeneous. It was majority white. About half of them were over 60, and so there's a large retirement population on the island. And to analyze my interview data, I used an inductive, iterative coding and categorization for my qualitative aspects, and then I'm starting to do some exploratory quantitative assessments of this information too. So I'm using a cognitive salience index, which is a measure you can look to understand what are the most significant aspects of a list, and that's how I looked at iconic species. And then assessing meanings and values. I have a lot of really rich qualitative data for that, but for today I'm going to start to look just a little bit into some quantitative trends. And I did that through coding those values quantitatively. And here's the relevant interview questions. So what is iconic about Jekyll Island? I left this one broad. I wanted to hear people's general feelings without specifically talking about natural elements. I asked them to name 3 plant or animal species that they thought were iconic of Jekyll Island. And then I asked them, when you were answering those questions, what did iconic mean to you? How did you define it to yourself? And then I had a set of follow-up questions, one for my long-term group and one for my short-term group. This is the long-term group. These were asked to residents and employees. And I filled in the blanks with each of their listed 3 species, and so I asked the set of questions 3 times to each person. And for the sake of an example, I'm using the sea turtle. What does the sea turtle symbolize to you? How important is the sea turtle to your identity as a resident of the area? And then how important do you think the sea turtle is for the economy, the ecosystems, and the culture of Jekyll Island? And these did not get asked to tourists because this requires more knowledge of the place that you're in. And here's a little bit of my results. The definitions of iconic I got were character defining and representative. This is the theme that emerged from the common responses that I received. And to the left are the particular coded words that were in vivo codes. So these were ideas people were verbatim expressing to me. And then I categorized them into 2 broader ideas. And so I think these are 2 interesting aspects of iconic species. The fact that they are representative of something else. There's that symbolic aspect. But also the character defining. This is contextual, situational. It's where an iconic element is standing out among a background, and that background is different somehow from the iconic element. So here's some quotes that illustrate. Iconic is what would stay in your mind as you leave, a symbol of the island. Iconic is something that makes it unique and special, things that are found just here. Something that when I think about it, I think about Jekyll, or vice versa. To me, it's a part of what makes Jekyll, Jekyll. And here's that ranked list. So the top, those were the 1, 2, and 3 most iconic species. And the salience index is a measure that's a combination of the frequency that something is named and how close to the top of the list someone puts it. So that gives us the idea of most important element within this domain. So the sea turtle and the live oak were my top 2, and those are the ones I'll be moving forward with my case studies. And I intended to do 2 from the beginning, but I also got this really clear break between number 2 and 3, which is helpful to tell me that 2 is a really great number to use for this. And then the deer and the dolphin also showed up, but definitely not as frequently or closer to the top of the list. And the total diversity among all lists was 27 species named. When I split it into my long-term group and my short-term group, the residents and employees actually elevated live oak a little more than the sea turtle. They named it 11 times. And then the visitors brought the deer into that mix. And if you've ever been to Jekyll Island, you might understand why someone did that. They have a reputation there, definitely. And when I asked, what does the iconic species symbolize to you for the sea turtle and the live oak, these are some of the themes that emerged from people's answers. And the interesting points of the slide I want to point out are that the sea turtles, directly related to conservation, and that could be because of the Sea Turtle Center being on the island and the protection efforts. So I'd be interested to see if that symbolic meaning holds in other places that sea turtles are found. And then live oaks, people directly reference that it's a symbol of Jekyll Island. It's a symbol of the South, or a symbol of Savannah. They refer to distinct places, which is good evidence for this relationship I'm trying to explore. And then the live oak, this is my favorite part of my data. These are ideas that people express to me about these species and the importance to them. So the live oak symbolizes the South's ecosystem. The trees are central to humans' connection to nature. You come here when you're a child and you see the same tree again and again throughout your entire life. The passage of time, it's sort of stability in the midst of a lot of dynamic forces. And they symbolize the island and its character. For the sea turtle, people come here to connect with nature. So I think the sea turtle gives them a way to do that and also show them how to help preserve the island. Sometimes we get a little tired of them because they get so much attention. I think once again it's a species that's fragile but critical to the identity of this area. And they symbolize the large effort for preservation, the threat of extinction, all the efforts for protection. So here's the values coding that I did. So these stem from the question, how important do you think the sea turtle is for these different aspects of Jekyll Island? So to do this, I took the example, these are verbatim responses, so I took the basis of someone's response to that question of how important, or is it important? And I translated that into a scale from a positively modified yes, so very important or absolutely, to negatively modified no. And I also applied the scale of 3 to -3 of values to that, and then a symbolic code for sorting these out. So this is quantitative data, but I'm taking it with a very large grain of salt because this is 10 people's responses approximately. Because these are my residents who also talked about sea turtles, so it narrows down every time. But from this you can see the majority of people answered yes in some way to that question. They think it's important for every aspect that I asked about. However, when I applied this numeric scale, I found that the mean score for the identity aspects was the most important part. And then the ecological contributions to the island was the lowest perceived one. Also, identity and culture are somewhat similar. When I did that for the live oak, I had pretty similar results, with the exception of the ecological value was considered a lot more prominent with the live oak. Once again, identity and cultural are similar, and the economic value is lower. So general findings from this is that the live oak and the sea turtle are going to be my cases going forward. The residents thought both of these species were important for the island in multiple ways, and that's all of those yeses I got for yes, it's important for the economy, the ecosystem. But however, both species were less significant toward the economy and more significant for identity and culture. And the one discrepancy I found between my two species were that the ecological value was more significant of the live oak than it was for the sea turtle. So that leads me to some future questions. Is iconic value distinct, or does it emerge from a certain combination of characteristics? And that's where that discrepancy in ecological value made me wonder, does ecological role matter for iconicism? And these are both protected species, so does protection create reverence, or does reverence create protection? Does that operate in the reverse? What are the mechanisms by which these iconic species contribute to the sense of place? And I'll be doing this with structured equation modeling and surveys in the future. And then how can conservation's decisions be informed by these metrics? So I want to thank my participants and want to thank all of you for listening. And if I have time, I'll take questions.